After a 4-year stint in the Navy, Hubbard became involved in ritual magic with a protege of British Satanist Aleister Crowley.
They start performing ceremonies to find a woman who'll be willing to be the mother of an incarnation of the Antichrist, Babylon. Sexual ceremonies were performed between Parsons and Cameron, with Hubbard watching and telling them what to do and observing things on the astral plane. And this was meant to, she would become pregnant and they would control this elemental destructive force. I can't emphasize this too much. Hubbard was trying to incarnate pure evil so that he could control it to his own end.
L Ron Jr. records that his father had first been made aware of the books of Crowley in his teenage years, when, while visiting the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., he discovered Crowley's infamous Book of the Law, a tiny booklet that Crowley claimed was channeled from discarnate Egyptian deities and promised a new era for humanity.
Really, the basis of Scientology, which is rather hidden and covered over, is the occult, the deep involvement with satanic powers. We felt that he was deeply involved with a British black magician called Aleister Crowley, and through putting himself in deep hypnotic trances and the use of drugs on himself, he wanted to become the most powerful being in the world.
He was very deeply involved in black magic from early teenage years, which was the use of drugs and hypnosis, as an example. He used to conjure up these demons and thereby plug into them or have them plug into him. And a lot of his early writing was, which could be called spirit writing. And so he was very deeply involved in black magic, as an example, especially from Aleister Crowley, which was an English black magician. And around 1947 or so, he decided that he was the Beast 666 incarnate, because that's what Aleister Crowley was, and he died in 1947.
The use of both sex and drugs in Crowley's form of magic cannot be understated. In an interview with Penthouse magazine in 1983, Hubbard answered a question in relation to his father's use of drugs. Did your father take a lot of drugs?
Yes, since he was 16. You see, drugs are very important in the application of heavy black magic. The personal use of drugs expands one's conscious ability to break open the doors to the realm of the deep.
What kind of drugs did he generally use?
At various times, just about everything, because he was quite a hypochondriac. Cocaine, peyote, amphetamines, barbiturates. It would be shorter to list what he didn't take.
According to Ron Jr., his father used drugs and self-hypnosis in order to beef up his will.
For years he used, even in the 30s, sound scribers. I think you would call it that. The original dictaphones, and IBM had one too, and he would read these, what he called the affirmations, into the dictaphone. This is when they were non-erasable. You know, the old Edison with the wax cylinder. He would write these up, or he'd take quotes from the Book of the Law and other places, and then he'd take whatever he had in the way of drugs and play them back. Usually he used headphones.
Hardly anyone believed Ron Jr. when he told this story, but the affirmations in their original handwritten version were brought into evidence in open court in Los Angeles in mid-1984 and are part of the court record. After being discharged from the Navy in December of 1945, Hubbard did not head for home, where his wife and 2 small children were living in Bremerton, Washington. He instead headed directly for a house in Pasadena, California, where an eclectic assortment of people lived, including aforementioned rocketeer Jack Parsons, who owned the estate. At that time, Parsons was head of the California branch of the Order Templar Orientis, or OTO, a Masonic brotherhood that was headed by Aleister Crowley.
But the church insists that Hubbard's participation in the alleged rituals was part of a government mission.
We know about L Ron Hubbard. He was sent in by one of the American security forces with a brief to shut the thing down, which effectively he did.
Parsons was seen as a person of interest at the time as quite obvious. Rumors of cannabis smoke and erotic rites taking place on Parsons' estate, where he had a number of bohemian and occultists living with him, had his 1940s neighbors quite concerned, and both the FBI and local police had investigated him.
Parsons wrote in the 1943 edition of the OTO's Oriflame,
I live on peyote, marijuana, morphine, and cocaine. I never know sadness, but only a madness that burns at the heart and the brain.
Interestingly, it was this same year that researchers working for the OSS, the predecessor for the CIA, began ultra-secret work titled Bluebird and Artichoke, and began the quest to find the ultimate truth serum, starting with a cannabis indica solution, and later cigarettes laced with a potent liquid said to be a predecessor of the famous honey oil. Henry Anslinger, the father of reefer madness, was working with the OSS on this project.
By 1947, the U.S. Navy had also launched Project Chatter, which included experiments with mescaline, a hallucinogenic drug derived from the peyote cactus, with effects similar to LSD. Mescaline was studied as a possible speech-inducing agent after the Navy learned that Nazi doctors at the Dachau concentration camp had used it in mind control experiments.
Conceivably, it could have been due to a OSS and naval intelligence interest in the potentials of cannabis and mescaline as truth serums that Hubbard began spying on the sex drug cult headed by Parsons and Crowley. According to Scientologist sources, Hubbard had infiltrated the OTO on behalf of naval intelligence, who became concerned when a number of their top physicists began getting involved, and this was creating a national security situation. As published in the Sunday Times of London on October 5, 1969, Hubbard successfully infiltrated and broke up this group that was run by Dr. Jack Parsons. This led to many of the top 64 U.S. scientists being declared as security risks and dismissed from government service. In relation to this, it is interesting to note that much of the early OSS investigations into cannabis took place at the Manhattan Project, the government's top-secret atomic bomb-making facility, creating a situation where employees of the top-secret compound were routinely secretly dosing each other and recording the effects.
Regardless of his motives, the charismatic Hubbard was able to place himself well with the dynamic Jack Parsons. As Parsons wrote in a letter to Crowley, although he, Hubbard, has no formal training in magic, he has an extraordinary amount of experience and understanding in the field. From some of his experiences, I deduced that he is in direct contact with some higher intelligence, possibly his guardian angel.
Despite these high admirations and testing Parsons' adherence to Crowley's law of do as thou wilt, which condones the total free will of every individual, Hubbard ended up charming away Parsons' girlfriend, Sarah Northrup, eventually marrying her himself before divorcing his first wife and the mother of his children.
With the assistance of his new friend, L Ron Hubbard, Jack Parsons intended to try and create a moon child, a magical child mightier than all the kings of the earth, whose birth had been prophesied in the Book of the Law more than 40 years earlier.
On March 2, 1946, Hubbard Parsons and Parsons' new girlfriend, Marjoria Cameron, the scarred woman, engaged in sexual rites in the Order Templi Orientis Lodge in South Orange, California. Hubbard, as scribe, intoned,
"Make a box of blackness at 10 o'clock. Smear the vessel which contains flame with thine own blood. Destroy at the altar a thing of value. Remain in perfect silence and heed the voice of Our Lady. Speak not of this or of her coming to any person. Displace thyself to Our Lady. Dedicate thy organs to her. Dedicate thy heart to her. Dedicate thy mind to her. Dedicate thy soul to her, for she shall absorb thee, and thou shalt become living flame before she incarnates."
The absorption part of the process referred to the mingling of the male and female sexual fluids, the OTO's Gnostic Mass. The mixture was allowed to undergo a transmutation in its natural alchemical furnace of the woman's vagina for a few minutes, and then was consumed in its entirety by the magician.
The campy sci-fi writer L. Sprague de Camp, who knew both Hubbard and Parsons, stated, "The neighbors began protesting when the rituals called for a naked pregnant woman to jump 9 times through fire in the yard."
When Parsons wrote Crowley of his plans for producing the divine child, he responded, "You have me completely puzzled by your remarks. I cannot form the slightest idea of what you can possibly mean." In a letter to the head of the OTO in the U.S., Crowley commented, "Apparently, Parsons or Hubbard or somebody is producing a moonchild. I get fairly frantic when I contemplate the idiocy of these louts."